and I do historical metal detecting as a hobby. And I'm going to share with you something that I found recently, locally. And if you have any interest at all in Scottish history, you'll probably find this pretty interesting. Let me just tell you a little bit about what I do first. I do primarily two things. I do, for free, a Scotsman's favorite four-letter word. I do a recovery and return service for people that have lost things. I have close to 30 items so far. These are just a couple of smiling faces. And I will tell you, Channel 12 and 25 recently did a news segment on me for doing this. And one of the things they asked me was, what's the best part about doing this? And I said, making people cry, which is kind of an odd answer, but I went on to explain, sometimes I'm able to return things to people that they never believed they would ever get back. And when you can put something on somebody's finger, in their hand, or around their neck that they hold really near and dear, well, sometimes the tears do flow. Sometimes they're mine, but hey, you know. And also, let me say this too. I ask people, if you're referring to me, use the term detectorist, not metal detecting dude or beephead, but most of all, please don't call me a treasure hunter, because I make no profit. I'm trying to bribe my way into heaven, but it's probably a little too late and too little. I do know some people that are treasure hunters, and if you're interested in that kind of stuff, go to Amelia Island, go to the Maritime Museum. Those guys are die-hard. They're actually negotiating terms with the Discovery Channel to have a little section on there. But anyway, after I told the people at Channel 12 at least a half a dozen times, don't refer to me as that, the newscaster introduces my segment with, well, here's a treasure hunter that does blah, blah, and I'm like, it went downhill from there. Interesting little story about the guy here in the bottom right. That was the very first item I ever returned to somebody. I met him on the beaches of Panama City. He and a bunch of friends were looking for a lost ring. Didn't take me long. They would give it back to him. Most magnificent man's ring I have ever seen. 4 monster diamonds on it, big gold band. Found out later it was valued at over $8,000. It was also his wedding ring, and he got married the night before.
Oh my gosh.
And his bride was taking a nap, and he and his buddies thought it'd be kind of funny to sneak off and go to the beach, and he lost that ring. And I've often wondered, what his honeymoon would have been like if he'd come back without that ring.
Different.
The gentleman up here called me right before his 48th anniversary. He had lost his ring. It took me 2 days to find it. He was so grateful he gave me permission to go hunt a big tract of land that his family owns in Interlochen. And there I found a second ring. And I called his wife, because it looks like the first one. I said, Patty, did you lose your ring? She goes, no, but John did. And I said, well, I found that one. She goes, he found the second ring. He lost the first one 30 years ago. So it is kind of fun to do that. Move forward here. Okay, it's not. Okay. Yeah, all right. And then my real love is historical relic recovery. I'm a bit of a history buff, and to me it's really sad that so much of our past is in the ground beneath our feet, simply rusting and rotting away. So I like to find these things, and if something can be restored or repaired, I like to do that and then offer them to schools, museums, and libraries. Which is kind of how I got into what I got to tell you all about. Okay, these are the things I'm going to cover. Where and how was it found, the cleaning process, the research, the translations and meanings, what is it, and how did it get here. But before that, let me, rather notable phrase. It says, it ain't possible for any Celtic son to make a short story short. And I have my timer going here, so hopefully I'll be able to keep within my time allotment. All right, where and and how was it found? I was invited by a lady who lives near the Florida-Georgia border to come out and search her property. And she said the fateful words that I used to dread hearing, but it's become kind of a good luck charm for me. You probably won't find anything. Hear it all the time. Recently, I had a lady in the Ortega area, 100-year-old house, invited me out. Probably not going to find anything. Well, I found a mason jar buried in the backyard, full of really, really large bullets. Beneath the mason jar, I dug over 300 of this size round and 50 of the stripper clips. These are post-World War I, pre-World War II. They're stamped 1931, 1937. Not something I expected to find, because they are live, by the way. And I made it a point to really carefully search the entire yard. I spent about 5 days there. Because they have small children, I want to make sure whoever buried these didn't bury a few hand grenades along with them. But anyway, like I said, she lives on the Florida-Georgia border. Her family has lived on the property for 4 generations. I went there and she was pretty much right. There wasn't a whole lot to find, but that's okay. It's the looking that's the fun. I found a few pennies, a couple old tools, some old buttons, a whole bunch of Matchbox cars. You find those everywhere. And I found a couple of small crushed cans and what I thought was the lid to one of those cans. It was round, about the right size, thin, and it was also coated in about a 1/4 inch thick layer of hard as a rock, dry black mud. But if you believe that something that looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck is most likely going to be a duck, I assumed this was going to be a can lid. And so I tossed it into my trash bucket. Now let me tell you, any good metal detectorist follows a code of ethics that basically says we're going to leave the land in better shape than we find it. That means when we find trash, we don't stick it back in the ground, we don't leave it laying around, we haul it away. I picked up litter on a couple of occasions. I've buried dead animals. But generally, whenever I'm done searching a property, you would have a hard time figuring out where I had been. I recycle everything. And so when I get home, normally I empty out my trash bucket. And to do that properly, you need to have separate containers, and you need to manually sort everything so all the iron is together, the aluminum, brass, whatever. And that requires, a little extra work, but I don't mind, because on occasion, you'll find something that when you found it initially, didn't look like what it does a little later. Maybe you're holding it at a different angle, maybe the lighting's better, maybe a little bit of dirt falls off of it. Now here's a really good example. When I found this, I thought it was a lump of iron. However, upon closer examination, it's not. So I get to the can lid. Oh, and let me share this with you real quick too. I want to share these 3 words before I go any further. There have been articles published about this in a number of local newspapers, but also a number of magazines, national magazines. One in Scotland, one in the UK, actually 2 in the US. And a lot of people come up and give me their response or their reaction to this, either after hearing the presentation or reading one of the articles. And for some reason, lucky, karma, and destiny seem to always come up. Now, I believe in luck. Karma, destiny, hey, that's up to you. But I wanted to share these words with you because when I get to the can lid, I'm holding it between my thumb and forefinger, and I'm back and forth a couple of times, and by God, it's a can lid. And I get ready to give it the old Frisbee sidearm toss into one of the barrels when, for whatever reason, some of the dirt attached to it broke off. And when it did, this is what I see, a loop coming out of the mud. Now, in all my vast experience with can lids, I know they typically don't have loops. In actuality, if you were a jeweler, you would refer to this as a bail. A bail is, you run a ribbon, a string, chain through it, whatever. You wear the item as decoration or a piece of jewelry. But knowing that there shouldn't be this on a can lid, I thought, maybe I should check this out a little further. There's always a constant battle between my sense of curiosity and laziness. You know, I'm going to throw it away anyway. Why bother? Or I want to know what it is. And this time, curiosity won out. I took it into my workshop. I got a soft bristle toothbrush, and I began to scrub away at it. And before long, I'm down to bare metal. And what do I see? I see a couple things that amaze me. First, I realize the metal is tarnished. That's been cleaned up in this picture. But can lids do not tarnish, they rust. What does tarnish is silver. And that is made of. The next thing I see is it is engraved. And I'm not talking machine stamping, I'm talking somebody with some artistic skill actually decorating this thing. But the third thing, and the most amazing of all, is I see this three-word phrase in Gaelic that says, I mock sicker. You can't get the hard K, mock, I mock sicker. Now, I know all of you being Scots are fully fluent in Gaelic, so I don't have to think about it. I, however, am not. I know very little Gaelic. In fact, I know 3 words, which coincidentally are, I mock sicker. And I know that in all the world, there's probably 2 groups of people who would really be familiar with this line. The first would be Scottish historians. Anybody who has seriously studied Scottish history would likely know the phrase, and if they didn't know the words themselves, absolutely they would be familiar with the chain of events that surround that phrase. The second group of people, who probably are much, much more knowledgeable than even the historians, would be members of the Kirkpatrick family. My boys, my gang, my posse, my cousins, whatever you want to call it. Because we know that in 1306, it was the Kirkpatrick who said those 3 words, which ultimately put a king on the throne of Scotland. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if a few people are going, at this point, okay, he's trying to pull something over on me. But let me share this with you. Now this is the Kirkpatrick family crest. I happen to think it's the most interesting of all, because we don't have any animals, birds, or fish. We have a hand holding aloft a bloody dagger. And what can possibly be more Scottish than that? And I'm going to go into greater detail a little later about this, but if you notice down at the very bottom, is that phrase, I mock sicker. Can you imagine my surprise? I stared at this thing for at least a minute, trying to make sure that I wasn't imagining the whole thing. I've continued to clean it, and when I did, this is what I had. As you can see, it's engraved on both sides. And I recognized a little bit of it, but enough to make me immediately suspect that it was Scottish in origin. The family phrase being on there for one, and then the lion and the thistle. Beyond that, I knew nothing, but I wanted to know. I did a little work with Google. I learned that the phrase over here, none shall provoke me with impunity, is a very popular Scottish phrase. It's by many considered to be the motto of Scotland. It is the motto of the Order of the Thistle, which is second only to the Order of the Garter in importance and antiquity. There are a number of Scottish military units that use that as a motto. There is a U.S. Marine Corps, I believe, battalion that uses it, and a number of athletic teams. Beyond that, Google tells me nothing. Like I said, I really want to know. So, I started doing research. Now, I like Albert Einstein's attitude on this. I don't know if he really said this, but supposedly he did. Is I don't need to know everything. I just need to know who does. And so, rather than me getting out and trying to go to libraries and all this, I decided to start looking for people who could spread a little knowledge for me. So I took a bunch of pictures, and I drew up a big list of questions. And I spent the better part of 3 months, every spare moment I had. Now, I'm still working on this, so there's still gaps. But I started with the big three of museums: the Scottish National Museum, the British Royal Museum, and the Smithsonian. I sent pictures to their history department heads and anybody who looked like they had anything to do with Scottish history in there. And I did indeed get responses from all of them. I then started contacting universities. I think I probably contacted every one of them in Scotland, a lot of them in England, and the major ones in the southeastern United States. I was looking for, again, history departments. I would send emails to the department at large, the head, and then all the individual professors and historians that work there. Museums, smaller museums. If you have ever been to the Tartan Museum in Franklin, North Carolina, those guys were unbelievable. They sent me as much information as I could ever hope for. Started looking for individual historians. Now, to do that, I had to watch a lot of documentaries, had to read books and articles, but I did whatever I had to. Specialist. One night, my wife calls me into the living room. She is watching Antique Roadshow on PBS. And somebody is on there with their collection of silver Scottish 19th century jewelry. And the guy who was doing the appraising sounded like he knew what he was talking about. So I tracked him down. He was very helpful as well. And recently I got a hold of a couple of silversmiths, people that are considered to be excellent in the game, because I wanted to know how it was made and how the engraving would have been done. And first of all, let me say, they all marveled at the quality of the craftsmanship here. They just could not believe it. I learned that I would have thought a little silver disc, they would pour it. Nuh-uh. They take a big sheet of silver and like a cookie cutter, they punch them out. And then with the engraving, I'm still having a hard time envisioning this. They would put the disc on a round piece of wood and it would spin. And as it was spinning, they were basically making the designs. Blows my mind, but hey, it works, I guess. These are some of the people that responded. For every response I got, I probably sent out 3, maybe 4. So it gives you an idea of not only this one, but also there's another page of them. That would have been great if somebody could have sent me back one response with all the answers. But that didn't work. Everybody had little tiny bits and pieces to contribute. And it became like putting a quilt or a giant jigsaw puzzle together. And sometimes I'd have to go back, and ask clarification and all. I also had a little bit of an embarrassing moment because I actually contacted one historian twice, because it seems that after I contacted them the first time, they changed genders and name. But hey, how was I to know, Now, and then I really hit the jackpot. The Kirkpatrick family still owns a castle in Scotland, Closeburn Castle. And I have become rather close with the lady who manages it. It's still owned by Kirkpatrick, a Spanish one of all things. Didn't know we sent them over there. It's a bed and breakfast, but the wife and I are considering going over there in a year or two and leaving it in their care. It's been lost once. We don't want it to be lost a second time. But Marina put me in touch with this doctor, Dr. Pamela Illard. Pam is a historian, an author, and a genealogist, lives in Australia. She is writing a book on the Kirkpatrick family. And she has asked permission to include this medallion in the book. And I said for 2 signed copies, we have a deal. But the wealth of knowledge that this woman had was unbelievable. She was filling in gaps like crazy. She also asked me to send her what I knew about my family. And luckily I have a cousin, remember that? Go to whoever has the information. I have a cousin who's been tracing the family tree. I got that information, sent it to her. Apparently we are direct descendants of the big boys in the family. I asked if that makes me a contender for the title. Apparently I'm like 4,000 down the line, but I can only hope, right? Maybe they'll all eat some bad chicken one day. All right, moving along. Let's talk about what is on that disc. And you have to understand, first of all, there's no real records of most of this. And a lot of this is being based upon opinions and theories. And you can have 4 historians asking the same question, and you'll get 10 answers. So, moving along to that. And we're going to talk about what do we know. There's some that we're pretty sure about. What do we think we know about it? And unfortunately, what do we know that we don't know? Okay. I've dubbed this side the first side. At the top, the thistle, which by the way is the national flower of Scotland. And if you don't know the story, supposedly many centuries ago, a Viking army invaded Scotland. The Norsemen were sneaking up on the Scottish army in the middle of the night while they slept. And to be more quiet, several of them removed their footgear. Right before pouncing, one of them stepped on a thistle. And if you don't know, they have rather hard, sharp thorns on the leaves. He cried out, "Oh my gosh," or something Vikingish. It woke the Scottish army up and prevented them from being slaughtered. And for that reason, it was honored by being named the national flower. The lion, longtime symbol of Scotland. Mostly you see what they call the lion rampant, which is where it's standing on its hind legs, but it was also shown on all 4s. And I have to say, without a doubt, that is the goofiest looking face on a lion I have ever seen, but I'm willing to overlook that because I don't think I can do any better. I thought this plant over here was heather. It's not. It's called rue. It's either R-E-W or R-U-E, depending upon which spelling you use. It's also called Grace's herb, which I like because my wife's name is Grace. But it is medicinal. And supposedly it tastes like crap. However, these 3 items were on the first Scottish crest. And I cannot recall how to pronounce the king's name who created that. That's how far back that dates. All right, we have a little technical difficulties here. All right. Next was this. When we first were cleaning it up, we looked at it, my wife and I, and we assumed it was a name. It looks like Tuchin or Tuchin, a middle initial of either an I or a J, Pierce. Well, we Googled old Tuchin there, right and left, every combination we could think of, and came up with nothing. And it was not a historian, it was a personal friend of mine who sent me a message going, that is not a name. It is a phrase. It's touch, and I pierce, as in stab. Sort of a medieval don't tread on me. Also, and by the way, if you Google touch and I pierce, you won't find anything, but if you Google Kirkpatrick touch and I pierce, you'll find all you want to know about it. This was a previous family motto. This was used during the Wallace Wars. And Sir Roger Kirkpatrick remember that name because you're going to hear it again in a few minutes, was the one who was leading the family at that time and instituted it. Now, and again, this is Pam Illick's version of that. That's supposed to be a thistle. I think people on the disc do a little better. But hey. All right. Little survey. How many people here did not see the movie Braveheart? Anybody? Okay. We're going to wait for you to go out and get a copy and watch it. It'll save me a few minutes of explaining. All right. Braveheart. The story of Scotland's greatest hero ever, William Wallace. Starred Mel Gibson. It was released in 1995, won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and is considered to be one of the 3 most historically inaccurate movies ever made. If your knowledge of Scottish history is based upon that movie, read a book. If you want to know more about this, if you go on YouTube and search Braveheart inaccuracies, there's at least 3 videos that will come up. They are educational and entertaining. But from the very beginning, I mean, the first words that they say to the very end of it was an example of where they ignored the truth, changed the truth, or just simply made stuff up. Yeah. I will give you just a few examples of some of the things that are wrong with that movie. Let's start with the Battle of Stirling. The Battle of Stirling, where in the movie, was when the Scots first defeated the English. Remember they had the big long spears? It was actually the Battle of Stirling Bridge. But yet there was no bridge, nor was there a river in the movie. And the way they defeated the English was it was a very narrow bridge, and only 3 heavy cavalrymen at a time could cross abreast. So what they did was they hid on the far side of the bridge, and they were counting them off. And when they got to a determined number, which was a number of English that they knew they could probably defeat and would also have an impact on the rest of the army, they closed the bridge off and then brought out a little can of whoop-ass and went to work. Speaking of battle, did you ever wonder why Gibson and his team were the only ones that showed up to fight wearing blue face paint? It's because Scots never wore blue face paint. The Picts did 500 years before, but not Scots. You also probably noticed they were all wearing kilts. The actuality is, they didn't start wearing kilts for another 200 years. They wore trousers. But the very best, in my opinion, was the beautiful Princess Isabella from France, who was brought over to marry Edward II. And they dangled her as bait to Wallace in the hopes that he would kill her and thus bring the French in to help them defeat him. And they also insinuate that she became pregnant by Wallace. Well, let us hope that that didn't happen, because she was only 3 years old whenever he was executed, which would have meant he was one heck of a pedophile. Now, I bring all this to your attention because this is at the bottom of the first side. There's a date, August 23rd, 1299, and beneath that, the initials WW. Now, you got a taste for how many people have been exposed to this. Never has anybody even slightly insinuated those initials are not for Wallace. I will point out Wallace was related to the Kirkpatricks by marriage. They also were a big part of his fighting force in battle. The problem is the date. August 23rd, 1299, apparently was a global do-nothing day. Because if you Google it, nothing comes up. But yet it's there. Now, we have been given 2 theories. You get to pick the one you like. It is a known fact that at some point in time, Wallace left Scotland and went to France, to the court of King Philippe the Fair, asking his help in fighting the English. At that time, Philippe and Edward were not enemies, but they were not getting along, and Philippe was prone to helping the Scottish. But he never quite got around to it, and eventually he and Edward kissed and made up, and then he could not help him, at which time Wallace returned to Scotland. It was insinuated this could reflect either his departure or his return. The problem is nobody has any idea when those dates actually were. And the question was kind of raised, why would it be on this and not in the books? The second theory is Wallace was executed on August 23rd, 1305. This disc was probably made 400 years after that. And hey, we all make mistakes, right? Possibly the year is the error. But on that date, that's one thing they say that the movie did not play up enough. He received one of the most brutal executions you could ever imagine. First of all, he was stripped naked and tied behind a horse and dragged 6 miles through the streets of London, during which time he was set upon by every citizen there. They would hit him with sticks and stones, throw stuff at him, whatever. He arrives at the town center. The first thing they did was hang him, but not to kill him, only to torture him. So they would pull him up, let him choke for a few minutes, lower him back down, let him catch his air, do it again. When they got tired of playing that game, they emasculated him, and they burned his genitals on a bed of coals, what made him watch. Then they disemboweled him, took the ends of his intestines, laid those on the coals. Finally, they ripped his heart out of his chest while it was still beating, and for good measure, beheaded him. And then they quartered him. They really wanted this guy dead. And as you probably know, they hung his head on a pike, and they sent his 4 limbs to the far reaches of the kingdom. So, sorry about that, Willie. Now, going over to the other side of the disc. At the top is rectangular form. I looked at that from every angle I could think of and had no idea what it was. Anybody got an idea?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry?
That's the flag of Britain.
Look at you.
I think that's the flag of Britain.
No, actually it's an hourglass. Now, hourglasses normally are used to decorate tombstones. The meaning is basically the passage of time. No idea why is it on this thing. Now I talked a little bit about the phrase here, none shall provoke. The heart with the arrow through it. Anytime you see a heart that is pierced, be it an arrow, a knife, thorns, that was a secret symbol for the Jacobites. Now, if you're not up on your Jacobite history, basically in the 1600s, the Stuart family ruled Scotland and England. It was James II of England. He was James VII in Scotland. And he was deposed and fled to France. Now, he was deposed for political reasons, economical reasons, but primarily religious reasons. They were Catholic, and most of the countries were Protestant. Now, James in Latin is Jacobus, and anybody who was a follower of James was called a Jacobite. And he left behind a lot of very loyal followers who wanted him back. And for the next 70 years or so, they were a real pain in the butt. They would do assassinations, murders, they tried to form rebellions. The English absolutely detested them. And then earlier you heard about how Charles Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie, if you were a supporter, the Great Deceiver, if you were not, left France, came back to Scotland, went up into the mountains to the Highlanders, raised an army, and proceeded to attempt to take the country back. And he had some initial success until the Battle of Culloden. And what happened? he marched his men 30 miles to a place that he had picked out to fight. Now, he had some excellent military experts on his team. And they all told him, do not fight here. It was a big, open, wide area. And his men would have to cross that area to get to the English, who outnumbered him 3-1 and had much better weaponry. They had muskets that could fire a long distance fairly accurately. So the men were tired, the field was bad, but Charles kept saying over and over again, God is on our team. God will take care of us. And so he sent his men. About 70% of them were either killed or wounded in that drive. They didn't make it to the British side, but they weren't there long. The British lost practically nobody. Charlie suddenly remembered he left the burner on in France and said, I gotta go, guys. Went back and never returned. Also, with the English was the Campbell family. For some reason, they had decided to, they'd had enough of the Jacobites as well, and they fought alongside the English. Well, they decided that they were going to put an end to the Jacobites once and for all. So first of all, any wounded or prisoners were executed. They then proceeded to spend about a year going back and forth across the Highlands. And every time they came across a house, they burned it. They killed a lot of livestock. The men were generally either executed or thrown in prison. Back then, if you were a noble, they beheaded you. If you were a commoner, they hung you. There's a Kirkpatrick, who was indeed beheaded and his land seized for being a Jacobite. And anyway, they purged them, and they all had to go underground. So if you remember, the early Christians used the symbol of a fish, but with the Jacobites, it was a heart that was pierced because of the heartbreak of the Battle of Culloden. Now, this, when I first laid my eyes on it, I got really excited. I thought, wow, that's somebody metal detector. Unfortunately, metal detectors weren't invented until 1800s. And again, this little thing down here, I'm like, what the heck is that? That is a rose. And a rose symbolizes England. I got 3 theories here. One is that this is a unicorn, and its horn is piercing or fighting England. Now maybe they grow a different kind of unicorn over there than what I'm used to, you know, my little pony and stuff like that. But that's somebody's thought. The second was that it's a crowned horse with a lance, again, striking the rose. And the idea here was that it reflects a Scottish noble defeating an English noble in a joust. Likewise, it looked like a horse to me, and the artistry on this has been pretty good. Most people responded, no, it is indeed a hand holding a sword, striking the enemy. And a couple side quotes came from this. It was said that it pretty much proves that this was owned by a nobleman because the hand is protected by a glove of mail, and only the nobles could afford to protect their hands. Another comment was this was owned by a nobleman because the amount of silver in it would have been about 8 months worth of wages for a common worker. Now this brings us down to I mock sinner. In 1306, Robert the Bruce desperately wanted to become king. But he had a problem. There was another nobleman by the name of John Comyn. It's spelled C-O-M-Y-N. There were 2 John Comyns, father and son. Father went by the name of Black Comyn, and Junior Red Comyn. Maybe they were Bulldog fans, I don't know. Red was the one that was giving Bruce such a hard time. At one of the gatherings of the nobles, he struck Bruce, which was a big no-no. But Edward stuck his nose into things, and he named the 2 of them co-guardians of Scotland. because he'd been friendly with both of their fathers. Now, guardian was a lot like being vice president. A whole lot of responsibility, no real authority. And in my personal thought, he did this so that the two young men would spend their time fighting between themselves instead of him. And that might be true. At one point in time, Bruce confessed to Common that he was drawing up plans for a rebellion. And Common stayed quiet about it until Bruce went to England. Then he sent word to Edward, notifying him of what Bruce was planning to do. Edward became outraged, sent men to arrest Bruce, but somebody got to him first and warned him what was happening, and he slipped back over the border to relative safety in Scotland. At this point, probably realizing he was going to come in first runner-up in the race to become king, he sent a message to Common that basically said, this country needs a king, and it needs to be one of us. And I am going to propose that we meet at the altar of the Greyfriars Church in Dumfries and see if we can negotiate terms between ourselves. Which was a great plan because, hey, the church was a place of sanctuary. The idea was they would meet at the door, they'd go in unarmed and alone, and try and work things out. And supposedly, one of the offers he made was that if Common would accept him being king, he would sign all the Bruce properties over to the Common family. Or if Common wanted the throne and was willing to do likewise, they could work that out. So Common agrees, because again, he's safe in the church. They meet at the door. Each of them has a couple of attendees, trusted family and friends. Sir Roger Kirkpatrick was Bruce's best friend and cousin who was there. They're searched, they go in. And nobody knows what happened, but somehow Bruce lays his hands on a dagger and stabs Common. And then he ran. Which has always struck me as odd because your worst opponent is unarmed and badly wounded. You're healthy and with a weapon and you run away. He runs out of the church, and the first person he sees is Kirkpatrick. He becomes alarmed by all the blood. Once he finds out it's not Bruce's blood, and he learns the story, he asks the fateful question, is Common dead? Because if he's still alive, there's a world of trouble coming down. And Bruce replies, I don't think so. Kirkpatrick pulls his dagger and says, I mock sicker, which means I make sure. He enters the church and completes the butchery of John Common. Now again, this is our family crest. So here you see the hand. When I had this drawn up, I made them put more blood on it. Hey, we're Scotch now, that's part of the header. Here's our shield. Those are supposed to be 3 pillows. Some people argue they're bags of grain, but most people believe they're pillows. Now, it does not mean the Kirkpatricks are world-class nap takers, even though I am. What it means is they had to flee, and they spent 3 nights sleeping in the woods because they were being pursued by the authorities and the Common family. And then, of course, the cross, because Kirkpatrick means Church of Patrick. And then the phrase. Bruce goes to the church and basically asks permission to be crowned king. Now, we hear about collusion these days. Talk about collusion. They should have excommunicated him on the spot. However, he apparently was their boy, and they looked the other way, and he was crowned 9 days after butchering John Common. At which time, he gave Roger Kirkpatrick a couple of castles, like one of which is still in the family, and decreed that I mock sicker would be the family motto. I'm not really sure. Y'all tell me, should I be proud or ashamed? I mean, one of our boys killed somebody in the church, you know. All right. Now, question comes up, what is it? Well, obviously the veil means it's a medallion made to be worn. But what was its purpose? Again, nobody knows because this is apparently a one of a kind. no one has ever seen anything remotely like this. One theory is that one of the people, I'm about saying I'm running out of time, so I'll stop go real fast. One idea is that one of the Kirkpatricks was being forced to come to the New World. This was made up to be kind of a family history, memory book. The second one is that this might be a political ID card. The first part of it is all Wallace. The second part is Jacobite and post-Jacobite. And I'm not really up on how the politics were back then, but what was suggested was they would wear it hidden when they were around strangers. And then once they had an idea for what their political leanings were, they'd pull it out and wear it one side or the other up. Nobody ever says in Scottsburg, we're dumb here. In fact, one of the things that the chieftains used to do, anytime there was an armed conflict, let's say there were two clans at war and they lived close to them, they'd send men to fight on both teams. So whoever won, they had a political advantage. And I said, hey, I sent you Angus and Bob and Pedro, and you owe me now. Now, how did it get here? In 1740, or actually 1731, James Oglethorpe gets a charter for the colony of Georgia. And one of the responsibilities he was given was to make sure that the Spanish of St. Augustine did not become the Spanish of South Carolina. And to do that, he needed a strong fighting force. And he recruited a bunch of Highlanders, and they also had some Jacobites released from prison, and they formed the town of Darien, which is at exit 75 on I-95 North. One of the things they did, they went to Amelia Island, which, by the way, Oglethorpe gave his name, to avenge the murder of two Scotsmen who were killed by Indians friendly to and supplied by the Spanish. They then went down and captured several small forts around St. Augustine and attempted to capture St. Augustine itself, which they were unable to do. So we are thinking one of my gang was sent over, voluntarily or otherwise. And if you notice on the medallion, it's got a crease. The theory is that was damaged in armed combat, possibly contact with a knife, a spear, whatever, and that's how it became lost. This is a 1775 Spanish coin I found, not far from where I uncovered this. So, real quickly, these are just some of the magazines this has been published in. Treasure Hunting is a UK publication. Archaeology and Metal Detecting magazine is Scottish. And American Digger, you can only guess where it came from. But you will notice it's right in the center of the cover. I have won several awards, you might call it, among some of the giants in the metal detecting industry. This is Closburn Castle. It's a bed and breakfast. And we are contemplating putting a permanent loan there. And thank you for listening to me. If you have any questions,